الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ به تعالى من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن سيدنا محمدا عبده ورسوله وصفيه من خلقه وخليله. بلغ الرسالة وأدى الأمانة ونصح للأمة فكشف الله تعالى به الغمة وجاهد في الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين من ربه. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد الرحمة المهداة وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين وعلى أصحابه وعلى من تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. All praises belonging to Allah Azza wa Jal, and may the peace and blessings be upon His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and upon his family and companions in entirety. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal on this blessed day of Friday to make us of those who are surrounded with positive influence and of those who influence others to Allah Azza wa Jal, to bring others closer to Allah, to help others through the struggles of life and to the journey to Jannah. Allahumma ameen. Amma ba'd, brothers and sisters, we know of the Quran that it is a book that is described as لا تنقضي عجائبه. Its guidance never ceases. Its gems are never fully encompassed. There's always something to reflect on. There's always some guidance to inspire. And it is prudent for the mu'min, for the believer, to have that reflective relationship with the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. And as I was reciting from Surah Ali Imran, some of the verses describing a scene from the life of the Prophet ﷺ caught my attention in a particular way. And those verses are about the lessons from Uhud. And in those verses, Allah Azza wa Jal gives us so much guidance. We know the story. It's been repeated so many times. And the purpose of this khutbah isn't to repeat the story, but is to reflect on a certain aspect of it that Allah Azza wa Jal highlights for us. Something to understand our humanity. Something to understand our human experience and how we could become better. Because brothers and sisters, that's what it's all about. How can I go from Jumu'ah to Jumu'ah, from Ramadan to Ramadan, from year to year, becoming a better person? Because there's always a way to become better, and there's never an end to that growth. Allah Azza wa Jal in the verses about the lessons from Uhud tells us how influencers, mu'athirat, impact a person, especially in adversity. There's a bunch of verses that highlight that subject of ta'thir, influence. What influences people? How am I influenced? What influences me? How am I an influencer? That's something to reflect on. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us, إِذْ تُصْعِدُونَ وَلَا تَلْوُونَ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ وَالرَّسُولُ يَدْعُوكُمْ فِي أُخْرَاكُمْ. He tells us something about the companions. وَنَحْنُ نَعْلَمُ مَحَبَّةَ صَحَابَةِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ لِرَسُولِهِ. We know how much the companions loved the Prophet. But he tells us that in this scene, there's a certain influencer that dominated the reaction. And that influencer was raw emotion, was a certain khawf and fear that overcame some of the companions. To the extent that they turned their backs to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The verse says, وَالرَّسُولُ يَدْعُوكُمْ فِي أُخْرَاكُمْ فِي هَذَا الْمَشْهَدِ. Can you imagine that? Something so deep an influencer that sahabiyun min sahabati Rasulillah turns his back on the Prophet of Allah. Influencers, brothers and sisters, thinking about that in Uhud. If you go along with those verses, and by the way, they're in Surah Al-Imran, the 3rd chapter, from verse 153 to 175. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about another influencer. He says, وَطَائِفَةٌ قَدْ أَهَمَّتْهُمْ أَنفُسُهُمْ يَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ ظَنَّ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ يَقُولُونَ لَوْ كَانَ لَنَا مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٌ مَا قُتِلْنَا هَاهُنَا. In that difficult circumstance in Uhud, in that difficult moment of adversity, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us that there was another group of people who had another influencer. What was that influencer? That was the nafs. أَهَمَّتْهُمْ أَنفُسُهُمْ. Their nufus clouded their perception of the situation. They had a false perception of what unfolded. They يَظُنُّونَ بِاللَّهِ غَيْرَ الْحَقِّ. Their assumptions of Allah Azza wa Jal are way off. They said, لَوْ كَانَ لَنَا مِنَ الْأَمْرِ شَيْءٍ. If the affairs were in our hand, we would have had a different result in Uhud. And then Allah Azza wa Jal tells them, قُلْ إِنَّ الْأَمْرَ كُلَّهُ لِلَّهِ. What are you saying? Are you really thinking that your capabilities are stronger than that of Allah Azza wa Jal? That's not the lesson to be had here. Pay attention. Allah is telling us about influencers. This is another influencer here. And another influencer yet. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us the role of shaitan in Uhud. Look at the words in the verse. Allah Azza wa Jal says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَلَّوْا مِنْكُمْ يَوْمَ الْتَقَى الْجَمْعَانِ إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ بِبَعْضِ مَا كَسَبُوا. Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us, you see what happened in Uhud, and how some retreated all the way back to Medina. They turned their backs. And the reason why they came about, underline these words, إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ. That's another influencer in life. The shaitan and the power of the shaitan. The reason why that came about in their hearts, these are great companions. Allah is teaching us a lesson. One of these companions is Sayyidina Uthman, one of the Khulafa al-Rashideen. We love these companions. Allah is not putting them down. And as such, if Sayyidina Uthman, if the companions of the Prophet ﷺ had something to learn from life, and how influencers impact my judgment and my decisions, you better believe that every single one of us is that person. There's a reason why Allah Azza wa Jal gave us this example in these Sahaba, these individuals who we don't doubt in terms of their purity as individuals, their greatness as individuals. They're far, far beyond us. We know that. But Allah Azza wa Jal wants us to understand something about the nafs al-bashariyah, the human experience. Another influencer, brothers and sisters. The munafiqeen in Uhud. Allah Azza wa Jal says their reaction to Uhud was, لَوْ أَطَاعُونَا مَا قُتِلُوا. Their reaction was, if the others who went out to Uhud followed us, then that wouldn't have happened to them. Another influencer. And then the last, Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about the influence of Allah and His Prophet. And how, if that's genuine and pure, it can completely vanquish the influence of everything else. He describes in these verses, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. What influenced the Sahaba from the character of the Prophet ﷺ? It was just that. His leen, his rahmah. وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. That's also in the context of these verses. So Allah wants us to think about this question. What influences people? And how does that impact them in their experiences in life? Allah tells us that these individuals, even after they lost in Uhud, and they were beaten and bruised, Allah described them. This ultimate influencer in the life of the believer. الَّذِينَ اسْتَجَابُوا لِلَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْقَرْحِ. They reached to a point where their istijaba lillah, their influence by Allah and His Prophet was so great that they had a certain power and strength. الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسِ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ فَاخْشَوْهُمْ. They had a certain power and strength that goes beyond any challenge in life. Now, brothers and sisters, the reflection is, what influences people? And the question that I follow that up with, why is the question important? Why should I ask myself that question? Well, two good reasons for answering that question is it helps me understand myself better. لأنه every single one of us has مؤثرات. Every single one of us has influencers playing out around him. If I don't know myself, if I don't know what defines my humanity, then perhaps a lot of the problems I'm going through is because of the things that are pulling at me, that I'm not addressing. What is influencing me? ما الذي يؤثر علي? What is influencing and impacting me as a person? I need to address that. What is influencing me? Why is the question important? It's important for me. And it's also important for me to understand, how am I affecting the life of those around me? You know, in order to answer the question, I need to understand the nature of people. And if I understand anything about humanity and the human experience, there's قاسم مشترك مؤثر عامل مؤثر في جميع النفوس البشرية. There's a common ground, a common link that impacts every human being. And then there are variables. And the complexity of these variables, how does it play out in the lives of people? Perhaps something يؤثر في نفسي ولا يؤثر في نفسك. Perhaps something influences me but doesn't influence you. Perhaps a certain situation influences me in one way and influences you in another way. Who knows better than Allah Azza wa Jal? That's something to reflect on here. When we talk about influence, Allah tells us in His book, أَلَا يَعْلَمُ مَنْ خَلَقَ وَهُوَ اللَّطِيفُ الْخَبِيرُ. Doesn't He know the one who created, the one who designed, and He is al-latif al-khabir. He is the subtle, the acquainted. And if you follow that up with another question, how does Allah Azza wa Jal address us? Who is the best influencer? Allah. We know that. How does Allah address us? Well, there's so much to say in that regard. About context, about content, and about delivery. Allah Azza wa Jal, how does He address us? What does Allah focus on? There's guidance through revelation. And then there is guidance through signs. Allah Azza wa Jal, how does He influence us? Allah Azza wa Jal gives me guidance through wahi, focusing on certain things, few things. What makes a difference in me as a person? There's no abath in the kalam of Allah Azza wa Jal. There's no senseless talk in Allah's words. Repetition of certain concepts, clarifying punishment and reward. Allah knows me as a human being. I need to know, what's the reward of this? What's the consequence of it? I need to know how to weigh the outcomes, because that needs a certain fiqh and understanding. An-nazar fil ma'alat. Allah Azza wa Jal knows that me as a human being, we learned this from the story of Adam. Me as a human being, I'm a very impressionable person. A human being, I'm very impressionable. هذا ما علمنا الله عز وجل في قصة آدم عليه السلام. There's a reason why that story was told to us. So I know how I work as a human being. I'm impressionable. Why? How am I impressionable? Especially if I lack experience. Especially if I can't assess the outcomes. Especially when I lose sight of the consequence. It's very easy for me to get influenced by my surroundings. Am I reactionary? Am I reactionary? Many people like to think, well, no, I'm not reactionary. No, I'm not reactionary. But do I have a reaction to the certain things that happen in my life? The answer is, I'd be in denial if I said no. Of course I have a reaction to I'm a human being. I have a certain element of response to the things that happen in my life. And I need to understand that about my humanity. All right, what does that mean for me as a person? It means that what I surround myself with is going to have a certain influence on my life. And you know what? That influence doesn't come from one event. That influence comes from a series of things that keeps on repeating in the person's experience. And this is not my estimation. This is min kalami nabiyyina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Look at this beautiful hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he says, تُعْرَضُ الْفِتَنُ عَلَى الْقُلُوبِ كَالْحَصِيرِ. That trials, experiences, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is telling us that whether you're talking about your beliefs, your surroundings, your desires, all of this defines your experience. It's a product of your experience, your tasawwurat, your beliefs about life, your shahawat, your desires, your surroundings. A lot of this is variable on what I choose to allow to influence me. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us, it's a battle for influence. It's a battle for influence. تُعْرَضُ الْفِتَنُ عَلَى الْقُلُوبِ. Is this something that happens once? No. Is it something that happens over a short period of time? No, this is my life. My life is a struggle between different forces that are going to ultimately have a certain level of influence on me as a person. The Prophet ﷺ is telling us, تُعْرَضُ الْفِتَنُ عَلَى الْقُلُوبِ كَالْحَصِيرِ. That those experiences, those trials, those situations of adversity is just like someone laying a straw mat. There's going to be end result here because there's going to be a reaction from the heart. The heart's going to have a certain reaction. It's either going to react, because everyone's going to react in some way. Now I could choose not to be reactionary, but I will react. I get influenced. I'm a human being. I can manage how I react. I can manage how I react. So he says the qalb is going to have a response. كالحصير عودا عودا فأي قلب أشربها نكت فيه نكتة سوداء. Some hearts take that in. It settles in the heart. And then the influence is, instead of for Ar-Rahman, for Allah Azza wa Jal, it's for the shaitan. Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us that for certain forces in life, for some people, the influence is great. And for others, it's weak. An example is the shaitan. Why is the shaitan have such a strong influence on some and such a weak influence on others? Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us, the shaitan's going to say what? On the day of judgment, well, He says, he's going to say, وَمَا كَانَ لِي عَلَيْكُم مِّن سُلْطَانٍ. I had no power. I had no authority. إِلَّا أَن دَعَوْتُكُمْ فَاسْتَجَبْتُمْ لِي. I invited, you accepted. And then Allah tells us in another verse, He says to us in this other verse, He says, إِنَّمَا سُلْطَانُهُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يَتَوَلَّوْنَهُ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ بِهِ مُشْرِكُونَ. Why is the shaitan so strong in his influence of my life? Why? Well, you know what? Maybe I've allowed that to happen. Because it doesn't happen once, twice, or thrice. Maybe the influencer in my life and in my decisions is actually the shaitan. Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ لَهُ سُلْطَانٌ. So in one verse He says, إِنَّمَا سُلْطَانُهُ, He establishes for him an authority. And in another verse He says, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ لَهُ سُلْطَانٌ عَلَى الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. Going back to that hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is telling us, it's a culmination of things. Your experiences, you're going to have a certain reaction to them. And your heart is either going to take that darkness in and it's going to settle, or it's going to push it out and become stronger because of it. That's going to be the result of the reaction to those situations and experiences. So my influencers impact my behavior. That's one thing we take from the hadith. And the other thing is, it's not something that happens in a single event. No, it happens over time. What's my influencer? What are my influencers? Because they're not usually one. They're usually not one. What are my influencers? What influences me more? How can I change that dynamic? How has this given thing, whether it's my emotions, the shaitan, negative people around me, positive people around me, Allah Azza wa Jal, dua, what's my influencer? How can I change that dynamic? You know what? Maybe I might look at my life and I might say, well, it's just this spiraling, vicious circle, and I can't seem to fix it. I can't seem to fix the problems that are in my life. Well, maybe I'm not addressing the influencers. I'm not addressing what's allowing this situation to happen over and over again. That's what I need to reflect on today. ما الذي يؤثر على قلبي؟ ما الذي سمحت له أن يؤثر على حياتي? What is it? Who is it? Why is it the case? How can I change that dynamic? That's something Allah Azza wa Jal gives us to reflect on. From Surah Ali Imran, in the story about Uhud, telling us about the scene. Everyone's influenced. What am I influenced by? أسأل الله عز وجل أن يجعلنا ممن يستمع إلى داعية الخير ويتقرب إلى الله عز وجل بذلك، وأسأله أن يمنع عنا داعية الشر. اللهم آمين. ادعوا الله وأنتم موقنون بالإجابة. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله ولتنظر نفس ما قدمت لغد واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون. أما بعد, brothers and sisters, this subject, influencing or being influenced, is a critical one to think about. Because at this very moment, if I'm honest with myself, I could perhaps list a few things that are really consuming me. I need to be honest with myself, because you know what? Positive change can never happen in a person's life if they're not honest with themselves. That's number one. I need to be honest with myself. Number two, I need to be willing to do something about it. All right, what influences me? Is it a shahwa or a shubha? Is it a certain sin, a certain vice that I have? Is it a certain khuluq or character in me that consumes me? I'm a person who just shuts down when I get angry. I do crazy things when I get angry. Well, how can I address that? Is my influencer something toxic, or is it something positive? Toxic, is it my family dynamic? Well, did I help create that dynamic? What am I going to do about it? What's my influencer in life? Well, is it my work or my career? Well, how has it influenced me? If the answer is, it's helped me become a better person, it's brought me closer to Allah, it's made me able to support my family and have a strong and healthy family connection, then I'd say, that's a positive influence. If the answer is, it's consumed me, it's taken me away from my kids, it's given me stress and anxiety, it's taken a toll on my health, then I'd say, well, you know what, maybe I need to figure out how much influence am I really allocating to this? If you look at your life objectively, you might find that the answer to your problems is that 50% of the influence on your emotional and spiritual state is coming from something so toxic. And I need to figure that out. Or you might find that the positive moments in your life are coming in Ramadan, when you're making dua, when you're praying salah. Or maybe if you have a certain sunnah habit, it makes you feel really good. It cleans you inside. You read Quran for a little bit every day. Well, you know what? If that's a positive influencer and it's only taking up a small percentage of the large, maybe it'll help me figure things out. Maybe it'll help me find a solution to the problems in my life, because brothers and sisters, you could trace back every heartache, every difficulty that you're dealing with to something that's influencing you. That's waqi'. That's a reality. That's an important, I need to engage it at this level. I could engage it well at the level of the results. I'm dealing with this problem, I'm dealing with that problem, I'm dealing with this struggle, I have this good thing in life and I have that good thing in life. Or I could choose to go at the layer beneath. What is causing these things to happen? And how should I address that? You know what? I'm influenced, but I'm also an influencer. And how am I going to be asked about the way I'm influencing others? That's something that my deen wants me to think about. It's such a vast question. A teacher is an influencer. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ says that there's special reward for teachers. He says, إن الله وملائكته وأهل السماوات والأرضين حتى النملة في جحرها وحتى الحوت في البحر يدعون لمعلم الناس الخير. A parent is an influencer. How am I using that influence? You know what? Those who mislead others in our deen, they're influencers. How are they going to be asked about that influence? Our deen says, من سن في الإسلام سنة حسنة من سن في الإسلام سنة سيئة إلى آخر الحديث. It's a known hadith. The subject of influence is huge because we are human beings. And human beings have that dynamic to their growth. They are influenced by certain realities and they are themselves influencers in other realities. أسأل الله عز وجل أن يجعلنا ممن يقرب الناس إليه. أسأل الله عز وجل أن يجعلنا ممن يتحمل هذه الأمانة بمسؤولية وبجدية واهتمام. I ask Allah to make us of those who take this subject seriously. Because I'm going to be asked about the impact and influence I had about others. And I'm going to be asked about what I allowed to influence me. أسأل الله عز وجل أن يغفر لنا وأن يصلح حالنا. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واعف عنا وتجاوز عن سيئاتنا. اللهم اغفر لصغيرنا وكبيرنا وحينا وميتنا وذكرنا وأنثانا وشاهدنا وغائبنا. اللهم من أحييته منا فأحيه على الإيمان ومن أمته منا فأمته على الإسلام. اللهم اجعل خير عمرنا آخرة وخير عملنا خواتمة واجعل خير أيامنا يوم نلقاك فيه وأنت راض عنا. آمين آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله. استقيموا يرحمني يرحمكم الله. Just for a future note, brothers, please, if you come late to the masjid and there's no space, there's nothing we can do. There's a capacity that we have. It's a 100 maximum. We're supposed to be socially distancing, and brothers should not be crowding at the door. Jazakumullah khair. Barakallah feekum. Allahu Akbar. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. إن الذين تولوا منكم يوم التقى الجمعان إنما استزلهم الشيطان ببعض ما كسبوا ولقد عفى الله عنهم إن الله غفور حليم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تكونوا كالذين كفروا وقالوا لإخوانهم إذا ضربوا في الأرض أو كانوا غزا لو كانوا عندنا ما ماتوا وما قتلوا ليجعل الله ذلك حسرة في قلوبهم والله يحيي ويميت والله بما تعملون بصير. ولئن قتلتم في سبيل الله أو متم لمغفرة من الله ورحمة خير مما يجمعون. ولئن متم أو قتلتم لإلى الله تحشرون. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. آمين. الذين قال لهم الناس إن الناس قد جمعوا لكم فاخشوهم فزادهم إيمانا وقالوا حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل. فانقلبوا بنعمة من الله وفضل لم يمسسهم سوء واتبعوا رضوان الله والله ذو فضل عظيم. إنما ذلكم الشيطان يخوف أولياءه فلا تخافوهم وخافون إن كنتم مؤمنين. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله
أكبر.
الله
الله أكبر.
الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Please don't forget the masjid from your weekly support. تقبل الله منكم صالح الأعمال. We have a dua request for two individuals who passed away. May I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to have mercy upon them. One of them is brother Ali Khan. He passed away from coronavirus, and we make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives him and has mercy upon him. And also Fawaz Hussein Assaf. Allahumma fil lahuma warhamhuma wa'afihima wa'afu anhuma wa tajawaz an sayyiatihima. اللهم أكرم نزلهما واسع مدخلهما وجاف الأرض عن جنبيهما. اللهم إن كان محسنين فزد في إحسانهما وإن كان مسيئين فتجاوز عن سيئاتهما. اللهم اغسلهما بالماء والثلج والبرد ونقهما من الذنوب والخطايا والآثام كما ينقى الثوب الأبيض من الدنس. اللهم اجعل مأواهما الجنة ولا تجعل مأواهما النار. اللهم اجعل مأواهما الجنة ولا تجعل مأواهما النار. اللهم أبدلهما دارا خيرا من دارهما وأهلا خيرا من أهلهما وجيرانا خيرا من جيرانهما وارزق أهلهما الصبر والسلوان واجمعهم بهما في جناتك جنات النعيم يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله. جزاكم الله خير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.